Hi, this is Chapter 11, which I entitled in the book, The Edge of Consciousness. As you know, we've been wanting to tie everything together now because this is the application section of all this abstract metaphysics we talked about in Section 1 under Theory. So in Edge of Consciousness, we're going to start to get more into applying and seeing and pointing out to you things that you're already doing as a therapist or as a healer that you may not even know. Okay? Now, I'd like to start with a quote. This is Dr. Fritz Frederick Smith here applying a fulcrum to the foot. And he says, never push for something to happen. Do not force a person to have an experience. Dr. Fritz Frederick Smith. That is so true. You have to let things move the way they want to move. That's just the way it is. Another quote here from Dr. Rudolf Steiner. I am not one of those who dive into the day like an animal in human form. I pursue quite specific goals and idealistic aim, knowledge of the truth. This cannot be done offhandedly. It requires the greatest striving in the world, free of all egotism and equally of all resignation. Rudolf Steiner in a letter he had written July 27, 1888. Now, in keeping with the spirit of Dr. Rudolf Steiner and Dr. Fritz Frederick Smith, we now must turn our attention to the relationship of human consciousness to the inducement of fulcrums when applied in a proper manner therapeutically. In other words, what is it that happens when we apply a fulcrum to a patient or client? I sort of hinted at this already in our last chapter, saying that we're causing consciousness shifting. But now I'm going to put it more into a graph, and we're going to narrow in on one type of application. We'll use zero balancing, which is the application of applying pressure on joints. Alrighty? That's what we want to do. So, I quote here, joint motion and consciousness. Now, if you look at this chart, the pie-shaped space between the C, or in other words, conscious end range of motion there. In other words, it's the conscious end range of motion that the conscious mind and voluntary nervous system is capable of. What we have here is a finger that can move back and forth. Total range of motion, including unconscious and conscious, is TROM, or total range of motion of this joint motion. It is here between these two types of endpoints of motion that fulcrums elicit changes in consciousness that promote healing. Okay? The conscious endpoint of motion marks the edge of waking consciousness within the C, our conscious range of motion arc shown here. In other words, I can move my finger consciously this way, and that's it. It has a limited range of motion. A therapist can move it past that range of motion further for you. Passive movement. They can passively move it for you. Okay? And as we move further away, we move into the unconscious, where I do not have conscious ability to actually move that far for whatever reasons. Some are physical, some are not. But there is joint movement there further. What we're implying here, using this as a system, is that the end where your conscious range of motion is, from a therapeutic standpoint of view, with your movement, is also the beginning of a shift in consciousness to the next level. If you work on somebody and pull their joints long enough in a gentle, wonderful fashion beyond their natural range of motion, they'll go out. They'll go into an altered state, in a very relaxing state. Okay, now, on this chart here, fulcrums and consciousness, very important, because this is how I'm trying to tie it together. I had to pick one model and tie it together for you, so I picked the joint manipulation model, where you're pulling joints and applying fulcrums. In other words, a constant pull and engaging the energy that flows through the bones. Now, starting at the very bottom where number 1 is, we have looseness. This is the joint staying in its loose position, the way it naturally falls in the person's normal range of motion where they are. And it's with their waking state. Now, as you begin to engage and take up the slack, you're actually starting to cross their edge of consciousness and actually going into a dreaming state, or a rapid eye movement state. And if you go further into the fulcrum, with a little bit more pressure, you go into a dreamless sleep state, which is fascinating. And if you go a little bit beyond that, if you overload it, then of course you cause injury. and a person could faint or go into a trance-like state. But if you apply the right pressure, excuse me, they could actually go into a transformed state, or trance-like state, which is co-equivalent to the state of the Atma, or the divine spark. But the conscious mind cannot hold it. So this consciousness shifting takes place in many different forms. For example, in this next slide, take a look. Photo A shows a Native American ritual. You've seen this in Dances with Wolves. Photo B shows a Hindu saint being pierced by hundreds of rods through his skin while he dances. And photo C shows a traditional North African woman with body piercing through her lips and chin. Now if you notice that piercing, that goes between the meridians, the central meridian vessels of the conceptual and governor, yin and yang vessel meridians that go through the center of the body. You connect them right there because that's where they both stop with that particular fulcrum. Now these are all fulcrums. The man who's hanging there by the chest, like in Dances with Wolves, of course in 15-20 minutes he is invoking endorphins and he's going into a mescaline almost induced state of transformation. But at the same time, that fulcrum that he's applying is causing a transformation and shift in consciousness, and he comes back from this after having a religious experience and feeling very euphoric for multiple reasons. But as a fulcrum that's being applied in a ritualistic manner. The ancients did this instinctively, and we're discovering what it is we've been doing all these years. In photo B, the saint, the Hindu saint that's dancing, he's applying multiple fulcrums all at the same time, which again are inducing endorphins, but at the same time, after an hour of dancing, he'll be in such a transcendent state that the central nervous system probably won't be working, and what will be working will be the fascia system interphasing, like we've been talking about, with the etheric body. And the person has transcendent states, and many different things happen in these transcendent states that you can't get out of the waking state. So that's just a little bit there. Now another example would be yoga postures as fulcrums. Photo A in this slide shows a devout yogi in a yoga or asana posture. Photo B shows a young woman yoga practitioner in an advanced yoga posture. The postures themselves are in reality self-induced fulcrums that allow the aspirant to shift levels of consciousness when done correctly. You see, fulcrums are universal. They're everywhere. And you can't limit them to any length of time. They can be a split second, a billionth of a second, or they can be held for aeons. All right? That's the whole point. Now the next slide I'm showing you here shows astronomical fulcrums. What we have here is showing a shift, and this was also a study that was done. That's where I took this from. Aligning of the sun, earth, and moon resulted in the destructive Perigean spring tides in 1974. A type of celestial fulcrum took place at this time along the vector of the alignment. Dr. Lieber reported that for 3 months all psychiatric admissions to Jackson Memorial Hospital were at full capacity during this transformation that was going on in January and February. Now what happens here is when the planetary positions align, the ancients knew this, a fulcrum is created. That's right, a fulcrum of energy. Remember, it's not the planets, these are just the moons of the big spheres behind them. But nonetheless, they're focal points in transformations, points of entry and leaving also. And when they align, a focal point is created, or a fulcrum, a celestial fulcrum. In the ancients, especially at their ceremonies, which was more than just about growing food at spring and reaping during the harvest season in the fall, they also knew instinctively and intuitively, for lots of reasons, how to actually have rituals in order to channel this energy during the summer and winter solstice, during the equinox of the spring and fall, so that there would not be any mishaps, any loss of self and loss of dignity and any moral indiscretions. Today, during the holidays, you don't see people doing a ritual unless they go to church of some sort. During the solstice, you don't see people doing a ritual to channel that energy. During Christmas time, they're out shopping and trying to get a lot of stuff done. So anyway, understanding fulcrums and how they actually work socially, or vortices or vortexes, how they work celestially, how they work in atoms, and how they work therapeutically. This is what I'm trying to get across to you. The four states of human consciousness, all right, as we put on the chart here. We have the wavelength, the cycles per second, human states of consciousness, the higher principles that are related to it, and the kingdoms of physical materialism around us that are in sympathetic vibration to them. Now this table shows the relationship between the cycles per second of measured brain waves and the higher principles in man. In addition, the relationships to the spiritual kingdoms of nature are included, and they resonate with the different states of consciousness in humanity. So, as I'm saying before, masters can shift consciousness and actually have a continuity of waking state at all levels. For other people of lesser development to have that kind of phenomena happen to them would think it was a psychotic state and would become very terrified and snap out sometimes, because the ego, unless it's been properly trained, doesn't understand that this world around it, from the point of view of the higher self, is but a dream state, even though we consider it our hardcore reality. Anyway, we don't have to be masters to take advantage of these states in healing ourselves and others. The waking state, of course, is related to the human ego and the elemental kingdom of forces. The dreaming state is related to our astral and higher manas. Our dreamless sleep is related to our etheric body, and the physical mineral part of us, as well as our Atma, is related to the mineral kingdom, and it's our trance-like state, and this would be the delta state, of course. Now, the physical down here and the Atma way up here are reflections of each other. Remember that circle we drew like this? You put the Atma here, you put the physical here, they relate. So the physical is nothing to be disdained or anything to be rejected. It is very important to the Atma, even though it is a dream state from the Atma's point of view. So we're not degrading matter or anything like that. It's all good. And we need it all. It's all God. It's all one. So when we induce fulcrums, whether they be celestial, or whether they come from induced being mechanically through machines or through therapeutic techniques, we are actually doing something for that person. Something is actually happening. Vortices, vortexes are universal, and how we apply them in therapy is part of the applicational understanding of what we're trying to get across.